back to some normalcy, actually, with this season. How nice is that with it beginning? Because we got the first preview against Green Bay. It probably would have been nice to get a game that maybe, wouldn't be as integral to seating and stuff and standings to start off with. But nonetheless, Green Bay's early this year. And offensively, all these numbers that I'm about to say, by the way, from last year, that's all I got. So, offensively, they were 15th with 345.5 per game and ranked 17th in yards per play at 5.4. They were 17th with passing yards at 233.2 per game, and they were 12th in sacks allowed, allowing 36 of them. 15th in rushing yards, 112.2. 14th in yards per carry at 4.4. And they were 23rd in third down percentage at 36%. They were 8th in red zone offense, however, at 64%, and 15th in points per game at 23.5. Defensively, 18th in total defense, allowing 352.6 yards per game, and 22nd in yards per play at 5.7. They were 14th in passing yards allowed at 232.6, 15th in sacks with 41 of them, 24th in rushing yards allowed at 120.1, 26th in yards per carry allowed at 4.7. They were 15th in third down percentage at 38.1, so not horrible. They allowed 19.6 points per game, which was good for ninth, and they were 6th in red zone defense at exactly 50%. Now, their injury report is a lot more muddled than Minnesota's. Right now, they have Randy Ramsey. He is an outside linebacker. He's out with a groin. Montravius Adams, defensive lineman, interior guy. He's doubtful with a toe. Billy Turner, who was he was kind of vying for some tackle time as well. He was their guard last year. He was their right guard, and he's doubtful with a knee. And then you have Raven Green, who is a safety, he's kind of their third guy right off the bench, right after you see Savage and Amos. But he's questionable with a quad. Minnesota, 8th in total offense last year at 353.5, 10th in yards per play at 5.8, 23rd in passing yards at 220.2, but they were 6th in sacks allowed at 28, which I feel like that number is probably going to surprise some people, but hey, good for them. 6th in rushing yards at 133.3, 11th in yards per carry at 4.5, 15th in third down percentage at 42.8%. They scored 25.4 points per game, good enough for 8th. And then they were 10th in red zone percentage at 60.7. Defensively, they were 14th in total defense, 341.6 a game. 9th in yards per play at 5.2. 15th in passing yards allowed at 233.6. And they were 6th in sacks with 48. 13th in rushing yards allowed at 108.0. And 18th in yards per carry allowed at 4.3. 19th in third down defense, 39.7. Second in red zone percentage, red zone defense at 43.8%, and 5th in points per game allowed at 18.9. Now, they don't have any injuries that they put on there because IR doesn't count, so there will still be no Hunter. Don't let people say, well, they have no injuries. No, they still don't have Hunter. And, yeah, aside from opt-outs and Hunter, they will be all there and healthy. So now we get into the fun stuff. What I actually think. Those are a bunch of numbers, and we got some injury stuff going for the Packers. Now we get to the good stuff. I think this offense has to be more versatile with this. They have to be more multiple than they were, be a lot more unpredictable than they were with this team last season. Because we saw a lot of times they kind of didn't care about the bootlegs. They're just like, well, sit on it and go kill that quarterback because that's where the explosives come from. So I think they may need to get a little bit more creative with how they get that. And last year they didn't really use 11 personnel, really, only 25%. But their receiver room was not good in terms of depth. I think that changed. I don't know if it's good or great, but it's certainly a whole lot better than it was last year. And I think we need the pass protection to step up a big time here because that was the other thing. Drop back passing wasn't really allowed because all they would do is essentially put Zadarius Smith on any kind of situation where it's like, well, that's a drop back pass. All of a sudden, Smith is on a guard. He's on your center. He's on the other guard. He moves around everywhere, and they simply couldn't block him. So you need the pass protection to step up mainly in the interior. I know he's an edge player, but they move him around enough to where third and long situations, he's kind of an interior pass rusher. And I do think you need to feature the backs and the tight ends more in the passing game than they were last year in the beginning of the year. I think this kind of ties into being a lot more unpredictable, a lot more versatile, a lot more multiple, because that's kind of where you can get your mismatches. Like I said, we're not really too sure about the receiver room. We know it's a better room as a whole, but we don't know exactly how good those players are. And Green Bay doesn't necessarily have a secondary that terrifies me. It's not a bad secondary, don't get me wrong, but it's not necessarily, the Legion of Boom out there either. And so I'm kind of thinking, well, this would be a good time to kind of just ease them into it. It's like potentially we can get them onto, Rudolph and Irv Smith if we use them, and then maybe we can hit them with the Justin Jeffersons and, the Adam Thielens, things like that, who is going to be shadowed by Jair Alexander, I would assume. So that will be a fun battle to look for, and one that I would, once again, kind of a key into winning this game would be for Thielen to win that matchup. And Dozier, he is going to start at left guard. I think we know that now. And he did start left guard last season, week 2 against the Packers. And what they did was, although they pass protection was a problem, and they had clear communication problems, but I'm kind of hoping with, the offseason, they fix some of the communication problems. And one thing we could look at is they did rush for 198 yards and 7.3 yards per carry as a team during that game. Now, Elflein wasn't the right guard. We had Josh Klein in at right guard. This time it's Elflein. So we'll see how that goes. But as far as the rushing performance goes, they ranked in the bottom half of the league last year in 24th, 120.1 per game. And now we're likely going to see them missing a body up front in Adams. So perhaps this could be something that we can, we are a run first team. Don't get anything mixed up about that. So that is kind of a helpful thing. I'm just more concerned of will they actually bite on the play fakes this time around. And I'm not really sure enough changed for me to say confidently, yeah, we can do that. That will be changed. But it's more of like, how will it change under Kubiak? It's hard to tell. So week ones are always fun, aren't they? Defensively, I think you need to try and overload that right side because that's where all the problems are right now. It looks like Turner won't play, and that tells me free agent acquisition Rick Wagner. You might remember him from the Lions. He played right tackle for them for a couple of seasons. He is now in Green Bay, and so I would expect him at right tackle, assuming, because I did see he had some kind of elbow injury, but he was not on the injury report. That's why I'm saying I'm assuming it's going to be Rick Wagner. And I would also assume Lane Taylor is the right guard. So, 2 players that they ideally wouldn't want there, and I would say they ideally wouldn't want Billy Turner at tackle either, but I think the offensive line got a little worse, and I would just try to overload it as much as I can, whether that be with both Barr and Ngakoue and Ifadi. Maybe use some other guys in there that we may not have seen. Maybe Wanham can come in every once in a while and do something, or things like that. And just try to pressure that side as much as you possibly can. And then I would also expect a lot more running from Green Bay than we usually see, just because I think they kind of built this offense to be run first, which is kind of interesting when you have a man named Aaron Rodgers as your quarterback. So I just think overall it's like you don't re-sign Bulaga, who's more of a he is more of a pass protector, and you go get guys like Rick Wagner, who are probably more in the run blocking department. You go ahead and draft a running back in the second round, despite your need at receiver. So I'm kind of thinking they're going to run a lot, and that's going to test Minnesota a lot because they don't have their prize free agent right now in Michael Pierce. He opted out. So this will be a very nice test for this rush defense pretty early. And another thing with Aaron, just don't let him break contain from the pocket. That is when all the bad things happen. All of them. So just make sure that is contained, and at least passing game we may be able to mitigate some things. And speaking of passing game, always be shading Devontae Adams. There is no reason to put him one-on-one with any of our corners, because I think we know why. They aren't very experienced. I do think some people are freaking out about it more than they should be, just because, once again, Trey Waynes and Xavier Rhodes didn't really do well last year. I think it was like Waynes allowed like 107 rating, while Rhodes was over there allowing 123 on the other side. So essentially whoever was throwing at those two guys last year were Pro Bowl quarterbacks. We cannot have that. And I do think by subtraction that should get better, but you still shouldn't use that as like, oh, now we can just put Adams over there and it doesn't matter. Go get him, Mike Hughes. Like, that's a bad idea. That is a very, very bad idea. There is no reason to not be shading that when you have two very, very, very good safeties in Anthony Harris and Harrison Smith. So there is that. And I could also see this being a heavy screen team this year due to the lack of wide receiver depth that they have, well, not acquired. And score prediction, I do have Minnesota losing this game, 20-14. I don't have it high scoring, and I would like to think Minnesota would learn from what happened last year, but I do definitely need to see it first. Without seeing any kind of improvement, I don't know if I can expect any different. And I'm just expecting a very defensive game with two offenses that I feel kind of come into this season with very underwhelming offensive off seasons, because, or at least the potential to be underwhelming in the first couple of weeks. You know how it is. Sometimes it only takes a few weeks and they find footing. Sometimes they never do. But I think at least for week one, I'm not really too confident in either offense. And it's just kind of where I stand on that, because Minnesota's largest problem was probably the guard spots. I think we'd all agree with that. What we ended up doing was going from Elflein at left guard, Klein at right guard, to their backup from last year, who ended up even playing in like last year's preseason some tackle and center, and even played center in that what I like to call the fifth preseason game, week 17 against the Bears, and he played a bunch of left and right guard as well throughout the season last year. He is now your starting left guard, because you cut Klein and moved Elflein over to the right guard spot. So to me, that's probably going to yield very similar results to last year, I would think. And then with Green Bay, they simply kind of ran out of guys to give the ball to. And specifically through the air, because Jamal Williams and Aaron Jones before the draft were fine, I thought. Like, I think Aaron Jones is a really good back, and then Jamal Williams he's fine. Like, he may not be world-changing, but he's fine. And what they ended up doing was not adding to their receiver room, really. They did get Devin Funchess, but he also opted out. And I believe they did lose Geronimo Allison, but aside from that, it's a very similar group of receivers. And then I also think their offensive line got a little worse. So to me, it's just a lot of underwhelming offensive things going on throughout that entire offseason. And I have a feeling this is going to be kind of a more defensive slugfest than people would like it to be. And yeah, that's what I kind of think. I'd like to know your guys' comments down below. Like and subscribing, super helpful. And until next time, I bid y'all adieu.